Hi guys, this is Jan Gustafsson for Chess24. In this video I'm going to be talking about the game Fabiano Caruana against Ivan Saric. This game was played in the Super Tournament in Wijk aan Zee, which is a small Dutch village. It was played in the second round of that tournament. You probably are quite familiar with Fabiano Caruana, the world number 2. You might not have heard of his opponent today, Ivan Saric. Here we get a picture, 25-year-old guy from Croatia, and had a bit of a breakout year in 2014. First of all, he qualified for the tournament he's finding himself in now, the Wijk aan Zee Super Tournament, by winning the B group of that very tournament. Not only do they have their Masters tournament, the A group, they also have a B group every year, which is a very strong tournament in its own right. If you win that, you qualify for the likes of Caruana. So he won that. He beat Magnus Carlsen at the Chess Olympiad in the summer of 2014. Finished second in the European Individual Championship. Was the front runner in the very strong Poikovsky tournament for quite some rounds. Then ran out of steam in the end. But all things together, a very good 2014 for Ivan Saric, who came close to the magical 2700 mark. Lost some points recently, so he's at 2666, which of course does make him an underdog with black against Fabiano Caruana, who sports a very nice 2820 rating. Caruana plays one e4 as he tends to. Can go d4 as well, but has a pretty strong preference for one e4 and has used it to great effect all over the last year. e5, Saric, a pretty classical player, doesn't mind mainline Ruy Lopez discussion, and that's what we get. Bishop b5, of course. Caruana also as classical as it gets, likes his main lines. a6, no Berlin today. Bishop to a4, knight f6, castles, and bishop e7. All of this very much mainline. Rook e1, same here. Rook e1 used to be pretty much the only move played at top level here for decades. Recently d3 has become a valid competitor. d3 is the move that Caruana used to beat me in the year 2012, but it looks like today at least he feels like playing the even more classical Rook e1, which is more logical in a way because you keep your d-pawn flexible and you might put it on d4 in one go. Rook e1 also threatens bishop c6, followed by knight takes e5, so don't forget to throw in b5 here, stopping that threat, which Saric of course does. Bishop b3, and he plays d6. Once again, very classical, does not fancy the martial attack, which once again is one of my favorites, but instead mainline of the mainline, d6, c3, castles. We'll move h3, of course, still the most played move here. d4 might look more natural, but it allows bishop g4. Black has been doing pretty well from here. h3. Now black faces a choice between many systems, all of those well established. Magnus Carlsen likes the move knight to b8, so-called Breyer variation, planning to put this knight on d7, the bishop on b7. Knight a5, the Chigorin variation, bishop c2, c5, never runs out of fashion. In this game we see the third main line, rook e8, d4, and bishop to b7, so-called Zaitsev variation. Point of the Zaitsev variation is to keep as much pressure as you can on the e4 pawn with black. We see rook is directed towards it, the bishop is directed towards it. The idea of this is to avoid the very typical Ruy Lopez maneuver, knight bd2, followed by knight f1 and knight g3. We see black goes bishop f8 here, and he already is taking steps to stop white from going knight f1. White were to go knight f1 here. Black goes e takes d4, and this pawn on e4 is on prise, so you can't do that. It's something white really wants to do, but he has to find another way to play here or make some concessions to prepare the knight going to f1, then to g3, freeing this bishop. There's different ways to go about it. I grew up watching the Kasparov-Karpov matches where the move a4 was featured heavily, and the following sequence, although it doesn't look really forced, was seen quite a bit. h6, bishop c2, e takes d, c takes d, knight b4, bishop b1, c5, d5, knight d7. For a while, everybody and their dog chose this more or less automatically against the Zaitsev. Looks like black is okay here. According to recent theory, Caruana also has bad experiences with it. He lost the game to Morozevich in 2011, I think, after c4. So he doesn't feel like going here. Instead, he chooses a more positional approach to move d5, closing the center and thus freeing this knight to go to g3. Black goes knight b8, which might look strange, but it has been proven to be a better move than knight a5, when after bishop c2 this knight is a bit out of play. So the knight goes to b8, planning to regroup via d7. Knight f1, now possible that there is no more pressure on the e4 pawn. Knight bd7, and not knight g3, which might look like the most logical move, but knight 3h2, which is the main line here. Always a move that's a bit hard to explain, but it does free the way for the queen, can go to f3 and join the action on the king side. And it keeps the option open of exchanging itself for its colleague on f6, which is very useful in many lines. So knight 3h2, very typical maneuver for these structures as well. This position is well known, has been played many times at top level. Caruana himself played it, I believe, more than once. At least he had it in a black game against Vichy Anand in the year 2013, so not that long ago. Pretty much everybody plays the move knight c5 in this position, chasing this bishop away, and after bishop c2, the move c6, playing to chip away at the white center, opening the position. Here, after b4, knight d7, d takes c, bishop takes c6. Many people have spent a lot of time looking at this position. I'm sure so is Caruana, but he's not going to get it on the board today because Saric has his own ideas. He plays his own ideas. He plays the move a5. Planning to go a4, followed by c6, and not losing time, moving this knight to c5 and back, as we saw in the other line. Very interesting idea. Came as a surprise for Caruana, which might sound strange because Saric already played the move. He had a game in 2010 where he played this, but the explanation is quite simple, that if you prepare for an opponent nowadays, there's so much information that normally you only go like 2-3 years back. So when Caruana is preparing for Saric, he's going to look at his games from 2012, 2013, 2014, but he's not going to go all the way back to 2010. So it is quite normal that he would not be aware of that game. Still a5, Caruana chose the move a4, which is not the most common move here, but it is the most principled, stopping black's idea. Queen f3 or knight g4 have also been seen. a4, now black switches gears, plays the move b4, securing the c5 square for his knight now, because it can't be bothered by white going b4 as long as there's a black pawn. Drawback is after cb, ab, white now has a passed a pawn, and this pawn on b4 might turn out a little bit weak, but the c5 square is very juicy. Bishop g5, indicating that he might be willing to give up this bishop for a knight for the sake of development. But for now, it's only pinning the knight and by no means obliged to take it. Saric goes bishop e7, very typical move as well, unpinning and introducing the idea of knight takes d5, which in some lines could win a pawn if white is not careful. Bishop c4, interesting move, improving this bishop and planning to put it on b5. Knight g3 was also possible, and a move Caruana had considered. When after knight c5, bishop c4, there is the very nasty little tactic knight takes d5, which works now because there is no longer bishop takes d5 winning a piece as in the other line. I'll make this clear in a second. Since after bishop g5, bishop b7, the knight can take back on b7. Point is, knight takes d5 had to be prepared by defending this bishop. If you play it immediately, bishop d5 is winning for white. Because now bishop g5, bishop b7, you win a piece. So knight g3, knight c5. Things are by no means clear here, and white has some tempting options as well. Knight to f5 very much comes into consideration, but Caruana decided not to go here and instead to play bishop c4 without waiting for it to be hit. Saric played knight c5 anyway. Now the most tempting move might look to be bishop to b5, attacking the rook on e8 and stabilizing, defending his a4 pawn. But Caruana decides not to go for it, and I believe he's very right, because you don't want to allow the move knight takes e4, a positional exchange sacrifice, which would have been extremely strong. Bishop e8, queen e8, bishop e7, queen e7. Black is just better. He only has one pawn for the exchange, but d5 is weak. His knight on c5 is pretty much eternal now. Black pieces are too active. You don't want to allow that. Since Caruana decided on the quite radical, but given the circumstances, best move, bishop takes f6, giving up his bishop for the knight. Bishop takes f6 and bishop b5. Now, the rook goes to f8, which looks a bit passive, but in the future it could very much help to get in f5. Overall, I think if we take stock here, Black can't be too unhappy with the outcome of the opening. He does have the two bishops, he does have a nice knight on c5. Position is about equal, but very complicated and very concrete. Next idea White comes up with is to play the move knight d2, planning to exchange this very strong knight on c5. And if White manages to do that, he would get a very nice position. So Black has to do something, and Saric does. He plays the very strong and only move, according to Caruana, bishop a6, loosening White's grip on the queen side. Bishop a6, the most obvious move is to take it. Bishop takes, rook takes. But it seems that here Black is active enough. c6 will come, queen a8 is in the air, bishop can go to g5. Black is fine, basically. So Caruana didn't like that, and instead he decided on the move knight to b3, which is a bit risky as well, because after bishop takes b5, White's idea and the move played in the game is the move knight takes c5. But now Black just goes away with his bishop, goes to e8, keeps the two bishops against the two knights, which, should the position ever open up, can become a serious factor in Black's favor. Not saying White is necessarily worse here, even though I slightly prefer Black, but it certainly is strategically risky what Caruana has been doing. However, he does have his trumps. For now the position is pretty closed, and there is some weakened squares on the Black queen side. And should White manage to go something like b3, rook c1, rook c4, this pawn on b4 could also turn out to be extremely weak. So very rich position here. Knight d3, queen b8, defends the pawn for now. b3 fixes it. Now you have to stop rook c1, rook c4. And Saric does by going bishop to g5. Caruana decides to regroup his other knight, bring it to f1, back where it could go to d2, e3, and join the fight on the queen side. He's preparing for this position, the position to open after c6, which was played in the game, and you do want both of your knights in the fight on the queen side. I'm not sure Black had to go c6. There's some other valid options. One was to keep the position closed for now and play the move g6, preparing the other pawn break f5, which looks like a very reasonable idea to me. When after f5 you want to take back, after f5 e takes f, you want to be able to take back with a pawn. I think that was a very playable move. Another move that's quite tempting is instead of c6 to go all the way and play c5. When of course White can take and would lead to the same position. But if he doesn't, then the position is stabilized on the queen side. The c5 pawn not only defends his colleague on b4, but also stops being a weakness himself on c7. So I think both these moves were pretty decent alternatives. But the move played in the game is by no means bad. c6. Caruana answers it with a very nice positional move. The move knight to b2, square he just cleared. And his dream is to establish this knight on c4 and maybe then bring the other knight to d5 when the white knights would control the position. Of course, not going to happen, but it is not easy for both sides here to make the correct strategic decisions, to find the scenario you want and the scenario you want to avoid. I believe Black went wrong here. He went the move f5, which is very tempting and shows Saric is not afraid at all of big names and of blowing the position open for his two bishops, which is pretty much what they teach you in chess school. But I'm not sure his position was ready to go for that. Said he had two decent alternatives. One was c takes d5, queen takes d5, and now just bishop to d7, activating this bishop, playing to bring it to e6. After knight e3, which is normal play, bishop e6, queen d3. Now black has to be careful not to allow knight d5 and knight c4. He has to give up this bishop, which doesn't contribute in the fight for the light squares. And by doing so, I believe he gets a good position. Bishop e3, rook c8. Black is totally fine here. Another option was, even at the loss of a tempo, to still play c5, keeping the position closed, and then slowly preparing play on the king side by going for the f5 break whenever it's suitable. So I think black had a good position here, and f5 might have been pushing his luck a little bit. Not bad by any means either, but I don't think it was necessary. D takes c6, bishop takes c6, e takes f5. Another problem with opening the position against Fabiano Caruana is that all of a sudden you are dealing with Fabiano Caruana in an open position, and he is the best calculator out there. Even though he was in time trouble at this point, and Saric was probably quite happy, he had around like 45 minutes Saric against 10, 11, 12 minutes for Caruana. But Caruana in such an open position just makes very few mistakes. Well, Saric makes one here. He goes for the move d5. Looks very nice, occupying the center, creating the classical pawn center, having opened the position. But he also is a pawn down, and he's not really ready to push his pawns up the board and push white off the board. So instead he should have just have played rook takes f5, taking the pawn back. But that depended on a very cute tactical detail which you had to see. After queen to g4, black has an amazingly strong move that is obvious to computers, not so obvious to us puny humans. Rook to f6, giving up the bishop, but if you take it, rook g6 will win the game because there is big problems looming on g2. And not only that, rook f6 also defends the other bishop, because after queen c4 check, now you go d5 and cover the bishop. So a very, very nice hidden resource which was probably missed by Saric, else he would have taken on f5. After d5, position still looks extremely unclear, but now Caruana is starting to get his knights back into the game and targeting the very nice black center, which is the problem of these hanging pawns. They can be attacked. And if they advance, they also leave squares for the white knights. Let's say d4, knight goes to g4, the other knight will go to c4 or d3, and all of a sudden white manages to control the situation. Probably the best black could have and should have done here was just to take this knight. White has a choice between rook takes and pawn takes, could make a case for both. Let's say rook takes f5, rook to c1. And I don't think black is in such dire straits yet. He might be slightly worse because he has more weaknesses and his knight will come into the game, but it is by no means hopeless, and he probably should have tried that. Of course, it's not really why you played all these breaks, c6, f5, d5, and Saric wants to play more dynamically, plays a move queen b7, hinting at d4 and bishop takes g2. That doesn't work. Just a concrete game. Caruana just ignores the threat, brings the other knight into the game, knight d3, and already, believe it or not, has an almost decisive advantage. He's a pawn up, e5 is under attack, knight c5 followed by knight e6 is in the air, and queen g4 attacking the pawn on b4 is in the air. It just turns out the tactics don't work for black. Main detail is that d4, which was no doubt planned, doesn't really do anything. White just goes knight to c4, and if you're taking on g2, there is the little problem that queen to g4 attacks both of black's bishops and ends the game by winning a piece. So Saric did have a long think here, but it turns out it really already is too late. He went for rook a8. Caruana just went queen g4, improving his queen, attacking this pawn. Now black had to take on e3, And another nice little touch, f takes e3, undoubling his pawns and more importantly controlling the d4 square, which could be useful after something like e4, knight c5. This knight can be regrouped to d4 where it would just be devastating. So f takes e3, another strong move. Bishop d7, this is probably the final mistake, but I doubt there was a way to save the game. Caruana mentioned the move queen f7. White is still pretty much in control after, let's say, rook c1, bishop to d7, and rook to c7. White is just more active and he has material up, so this would not have ended well for black either. Instead, bishop d7 was played when Caruana just took on b4. The ending is hopeless, so the black queen has to go somewhere, queen a8. And g4, Caruana showing he's not afraid of ghosts. He weakens his king, but he remains 2 pawns up. Did not see any refutation of his play. Is threatening queen d6 himself now. Black's cause is hopeless. He tried queen a6, knight c5, and queen d6, hoping to get an e4 and a big check on g3. But of course, it's not going to happen. e4 is just stopped by white going e4. And black is really running out of steam here and out of pawns. He has 2 pawns down. Rook c8, rook c1, rook d8, e takes d5, e4, desperation, but trying once again to get in that check. Queen takes d5 would have limited the damage to 2 pawns, but after queen c4 the ending is totally hopeless, so this did not help. Instead e4 was tried, but rook e3 just stops the check. Queen h6, queen e1, the queen joins the defense. White is 3 pawns up with a dominating position. And it's move 41, which means that time control is over. Caruana survived his time trouble, just as in the first round where he was also in time trouble, but played all the right moves and played power chess in that time trouble and won the game. Here some more moves were played, but it's really just desperation. Saric sacrificed a piece, bishop f5, gf, rook d5. After knight takes e4, he had seen enough. He's just nowhere near developing any attack or initiative. Piece down, rook takes c1, queen takes c1, let's say rook d3. It's a nice little pin, but it's white's move, and queen c4 or queen c8 just decide the game instantly. So, bit of a mixed bag, but at the end of the day, a very strong win by Caruana again. He did not really win the opening battle, and I also don't think he won the maneuvering struggle. I believe black had a pretty decent position around here and a choice between good continuations, even here after knight b2. But Saric maybe got a little overambitious with his f5 and then the move d5. And from here on, Caruana switched into his Hulk mode and just played pretty much perfectly, even though he was in time trouble, which goes to show he is in form, he is calculating well, and he is a force to be reckoned with. Moving to 2 out of 2 and the sole lead in Wijk aan Zee. Of course, 2 out of 2 is not a streak which impresses us when it comes from Fabiano Caruana, because all of us, of course, we remember the St. Louis tournament where he scored, what was it, 7 out of 7? I should centralize that picture, but I'm not sure I will manage. Here we go. Well, he won 7 games in a row, so he's nowhere near to that streak, but he certainly had the best start to Wijk aan Zee 2015, and it's going to be exciting to watch if he can keep winning, how his rivals, how Magnus Carlsen, how Levan Aronian and the rest of the bunch will react. Still 11 rounds to go, a lot of action. I'll be here talking about the games. I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you around for the remaining games of Wijk aan Zee. Thanks everybody. Bye bye.